Good morning, everyone. So I am from Washington, D.C., and I will keep up the Washington, D.C. tradition of starting any sort of a speech with a disclaimer, which is, sort of like Paul, I am an advocate for DB plans. I think it's important that you know that. And I don't think in this context it's a bad thing. I think many of us in the room have different views on what the purpose and future of DB plans are. And I want to be forward with you at the beginning and let you know, from my perspective, we think that a defined benefit pension plan for public employees is a crucial element of retirement security. So I guess in a sense, what I'm here advocating for is retirement security. And again, we think a cornerstone of retirement security, it begins with the defined benefit pension plan. So, Jennifer, we have how many minutes? 15 minutes? Okay. So, over the next 15 minutes, what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes just giving you a quick introduction of my organization and then do a quick history of public sector pension plans, because it's my firm belief that you can't really know where you're going to go unless you know where you came from. So, a quick history on how public plans evolved at the state and local level here in the States. And then I'll address some of the challenges that plans currently face, which I think is the main topic for this panel. And then I'd like to spend the last third of my session, or my speech, on what I think is the real topic that I think state legislators and state policymakers could be taking a real key lead on, which is the retirement insecurity faced by private sector workers. Because as Paul mentioned, it's not pretty to have folks who, in their golden years, not have the income that they should. And it just does not apply to the public sector. It applies to all American workers. So with that, NCPERS is the largest trade association for public plans. We have over 500 plans throughout the United States. We have a handful up in Canada. I wish I knew that we had some Canadian members in the audience prior. I would have made some slides specifically for some of our Canadian attendees here. But basically, we have plans in Ontario, British Columbia, and a couple of other provinces up in Canada. And we do what a typical trade association does, which is we advocate on behalf of our members at the federal and state levels. We conduct research to find out more about our sector, and we provide education in the form of programs that we provide to public pension stakeholders in the United States, our own programs, as well as attending other programs like SGEs. So as I mentioned, our firm belief is that all workers, regardless of whether you're in the public sector or in the private sector, deserve retirement security, and it is our firm belief that retirement security, you can't talk about retirement security without talking about pensions. Our website where you can get some information. And in terms of the question of, are public plans sustainable? And my answer is an affirmative yes. And again, I'm an attorney, so you can't have a simple yes or no answer. It always comes with qualifiers, right? And the four qualifiers are, and it's something that Dana already touched upon, is you have to have contributions from the sponsors. You have to have, in the public plan space, which I think is very unique and which I think is one of the strengths of the public plan system, is you have contributions from the employees. You have investments that are well managed and fees that are low, which again Dana touched upon with the pooling and the breakpoints and the economies of scale. You cannot get that type of efficiency in an individual account. And then finally, the benefits are appropriate and funded. So when you have those four tires, as you will, of a pension automobile, and they're inflated to the right level, then you will have a sustainable and ongoing plan that is efficient. So in terms of history, We trace our history back more than 150 years, so it's a very rich history here in the States. And the first instance at the state and local level that we point to, that is the genesis of public plans, is back in 1857. The state of New York passed the legislation to say that if you are a police officer in the city of New York and you are killed or injured in the line of duty, you or your beneficiaries will get a lump sum amount from the city. In 1866, that same lump sum line of duty disability and death benefit were extended to New York City firefighters. Then 12 short years later, in 1878, the city actually changed that lump sum to what we would recognize as sort of a modern day pension plan, where the city said if you work in the police or fire department for 26 years and you have reached the age of at least 50, then once you retire from the police department or the fire department of New York, we will give you a lifetime stream of income for the remainder of your days. And that defined benefit plan was then extended to New York City teachers in 1894. And then in the 1900s, particularly around 1935 or soon after 1935, is when you see a real blooming of pension plans at the state level. I know it's fairly early in the morning, and you had a couple of already presentations about pensions. So just to get the blood flowing and just to get some thoughts here, anybody care to guess why so many statewide plans started soon after 1935? Social Security, yes. And what about Social Security caused states to create their own plans? That's right. So basically, and I'm sure you all know, when Social Security was first created, enacted in 1935, it excluded public employees at the federal and state level. And so what the effect of Social Security was that at the state level, states had to create essentially their version of Social Security for their employees. And that's why, to this day, you still have a significant number of public employees outside of Social Security, because this is how public plans, statewide plans were created, because it was effectively a reaction to Social Security. So in terms of major enactments, I think Dana already went over this, so no need to touch on that. So in terms of public plan challenges, from my perspective, I think the first is we need to have consistent and full plan sponsor funding. Again, Dana, I think Dana's slide, about the at least at the state level, the contributions, to statewide plans, I think in one hand was very, very encouraging, in that the vast majority of state sponsors are making their required contributions to the pension plans. Where we get in trouble, and where most of the media focuses on, is in those instances when that does not happen. And given that there's no one here from Illinois, and let me just double check, there is no one from Illinois, right? We'll throw Illinois under the bus a little bit. I mean, Illinois is the poster child for a state where contributions have not historically been made. Now that's why that's part of the reason why 3 of the 4 statewide plans in Illinois are so poorly funded. The 4th one, which is very well funded, which is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, is very well funded because it has the ability to assess the participants of that plan, which are the small counties and jurisdictions in downstate Illinois. So, there are a number of studies that show essentially, the biggest factor of whether a plan is well funded or not. One of the biggest factor is contributions from the plan sponsor. I think some of the other challenges we face is it's a very dense and complicated topic. It can't readily be reduced down to 5 minutes, great. Okay, so I think there's a number of other issues. I think tax expenditures and revenue loss is a very big challenge for us. I think when there is this pitting of we don't have enough revenue coming into the state to make contributions into the pension plan. Yet at the same time, there are tax expenditures and loopholes that could finance contributions. I think that's somewhat of a false, choice that people are asked to make. When reforms are done and there are savings, there have been a number of instances where the savings, instead of being piled back into the plan to make the plan more sustainable, has been essentially repurposed for other purposes. And essentially, the savings never go back into the plan. And then you have, sort of outright reneging of pension promises, as is currently going on in New Jersey. So I think there is some of those things. I think another challenge is, the misunderstanding of Detroit. And I'm going to spend just a quick minute on Detroit because I think it's very illustrative. I think Dana touched upon it, but really, when folks claim that their state, their jurisdiction is the next Detroit, I think you need to take a deeper analysis, because Detroit was singularly unique for 4 reasons. First is the unprecedented population loss and loss of manufacturing job base. At its height during the 1950s, Detroit was the 4th largest city in the United States. At the 2010 census, it's barely holding on to the top 20. It's 18th right now. It is the only city in the history of the United States where its population exceeded 1 million and then fell below 1 million. So, I think that unprecedented loss of population and job is just unheard of, and no other city, not even New Orleans after Katrina, can say exactly what went through Detroit. Part of the deal back in I believe the early 2000s between Detroit and the state of Michigan was that Detroit would not exercise its income tax right. In exchange, the state said we would do revenue sharing. And right after the Great Recession, the state decided not to make its revenue sharing promise. Detroit itself made a bet because of the shortage of the contributions coming in from the state on the revenue sharing. They had to make some bad bets on interest rates, which went very south right at the Great Recession. And effectively, the governor of Michigan forced the bankruptcy of Detroit. The analogy I like to use is back in the early 1970s, when New York was on the verge of bankruptcy. The federal government, the state of New York, and the city all worked together to make sure that New York City did not go into bankruptcy. That was not the case that occurred in Detroit. So for these reasons, I think Detroit is very different than any other state and city out there. So let me spend 1 minute talking about what I think is really the real issue in terms of retirement insecurity here in the United States, which is the private sector. The public sector in terms of retirement security, about 80% of state and local employees have access to an employer-sponsored plan, whereas in the private sector, that number is significantly lower. And it really does depend upon what type of employer you work for in the private sector. The correlation is the smaller the employer, the less likely you'll have access to any type of an employer-sponsored retirement savings program. Not even a simple IRA, let alone a 401k or a defined benefit pension plan. So our concept is, why not a state-based public-private partnership to create retirement security for the private sector. So essentially create a statewide plan, not for public employees, but for the private sector employees who currently do not have access to an employer-sponsored plan. Why should a state think about doing something along these lines? Well, I think it's really about, pay now and let the magic of compounding interest and investments work for us, or pay later in terms of, greater parts of the state budget going towards Medicaid and other social safety net programs. I think if we are ahead of the curve, I think we can let the magic of compounding interest really work for us. Essentially, most experts believe in order to maintain your standard of living in your retirement years, you need to have somewhere between 80 to 90% of income replacement. And what you can see right now is with personal savings and Social Security, the average worker, and we define average worker as someone who earns $50,000 a year, will only get to 55% of income replacement. And if a state enacted some sort of a statewide plan for their private sector employees, at least in our model, we get to that sweet spot between 80 and 90%. So where are we? There are currently 7 states that have enacted legislation to study this concept. You have Massachusetts, which is the furthest along, which they effectively have a plan ready to go. They just need tax qualification approval from the IRS to open up their plan. You have California, the California Secure Choice Retirement Savings Trust Act. They have a board appointed, and they're doing a feasibility study. And the following states: Oregon, Connecticut, Maryland, Minnesota, and Vermont all have legislation enacted to study this concept of a state-based public-private partnership for the private sector. And in terms of, do the private sector want it? Well, we've polled 500 small business owners throughout the country, and these are the actual owners. And when we described this concept, 82% of them, on average, said this is something that they would be interested in. More significantly, 69% of them said if it is currently available, they would seriously take a look at implementing it for their own employees and themselves. So I think this is an area where states can really live up to the moniker of laboratories of good government. Obviously we have a failure of leadership in Washington State or Washington D.C., and I think here states have a true opportunity to be leaders. So thank you very much.